We march in our nation's capital to urge our parliamentarians to put an end to this 50-year-long assault on human life.
We have got to get back to the basics of life. Life is precious from conception till natural death. Are you ready? Gonna make some noise? 3, 2, 1.
We are the pro-life! We are the pro-life! The mighty, mighty pro-life! The mighty, mighty pro-life! And if you can't hear us, you gotta get yours!
Life is on the line. Children are being killed, dismembered in their mother's wombs. There is nothing polite about abortion.
Abortion's gotta go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Abortion's gotta go! Hey, hey, hey! Ho, ho!
No matter the repercussions. Enough is enough. Be not afraid, Canada. Be not afraid.
Welcome everyone. My name is Josie Lutke. I'm the youth coordinator of Campaign Life Coalition. I'm very happy that you could join us today, whether it is your first time joining the virtual National March for Life program or whether you've been with us since Sunday. It's great to have you. Just to remind everyone though, the reason why we're doing this is because typically we have a National March for Life on Parliament Hill. Like many other events, we've had to move that online because of COVID-19. And so we had this virtual National March for Life instead. And even though you're going to be at home, maybe watching this film with your families, it's not just like every other movie night. The reason why we're doing this is because in 1969, on May 14th, there was an omnibus bill passed under Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, father to Justin Trudeau, which decriminalized abortion in Canada, essentially opening up the floodgates to abortion. And then in 2016, the situation got a lot worse when euthanasia was legalized. And so it is very important that we continuously call for protection of life from conception to natural death. And even though there's a lot of activities going on this week, they're meant to motivate you, they're meant to inspire you and educate you so that you can continue pro-life work year-round. With that said, I'd like to remind you about the upcoming events coming up, and those are the Mass for Father Alphonse de Valk tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Eastern. All the times are Eastern Daylight Times. Father Alphonse de Valk was a pro-life hero in Canada. He was a former editor of the Interim newspaper. He also wrote the book Morality and Law in Canadian Politics, the Abortion Controversy. Following that Mass for him, there will be an 8 p.m. Virtual candlelight vigil hosted by Kathleen and Jesse LeBlanc, aka A Guy and a Girl, and they'll be moving personal testimonies, religious reflections, prayers, etc. Definitely don't want to miss out on that candlelight vigil for the victims of abortion. The following day is the big March for Life Day. There will be prayer services and masses in the morning. At noon, there will be the National Pro-Life Mass, followed by an EWTN special featuring our guest today, Alex Schadenberg. And then at 2:30 p.m., we're having our pro-life rally and March for Life live stream, which will be co-hosted by myself and the VP of Campaign Life Coalition, Matt Wojciechowski. And then the following day, Friday, I will be organizing a pro-life webinar for youth, and we'll have our last of our pro-life films that night because of Grazia. So if you have been with us the past couple of days, you would have known that we focus mainly on abortion, but tonight we're going to be looking at the other end of the spectrum and talking about the euthanasia issue. So to do that, I have with me Alex Schadenberg. He is the Executive Director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. He's probably one of the leading experts on euthanasia in Canada and perhaps also worldwide, because when we're not in a pandemic, he's flying everywhere and giving talks and presentations and so forth. He's also the co-producer of our film tonight, Fatal Flaws, Legalizing Assisted Death. And so it is really an honor to have you with us here, Alex. I'm very happy you could spare time to be here. And can you start off by talking about what motivated you to create Fatal Flaws in the first place?
Well, Fatal Flaws is actually the second in a film series that we produced. So the first was the Euthanasia Deception. And the Euthanasia Deception was based on stories, personal stories of people with euthanasia. So that film was based on interviews from Belgium and Canada. And the reason we produced it is because during the euthanasia debate in Canada, there was a lot of stories that were being, focused by our media, our news media. And so all these stories were coming at us from all these different media about why we need to legalize euthanasia, all based on somebody's personal experience. And yet the stories we were giving the media and sending the media and all the press conferences we were having, they were interested in. It didn't fit their narrative. So we produced the Euthanasia Deception, and then we were instantly attacked because they said, oh, well, that's just a one-sided film, it's only one side. And I thought, well, we produced it because we were producing the other side of the issue. We were showing that there's real life stories, real life people who've had negative experiences with the concept of killing people by euthanasia. So what we did is we started the production on Fatal Flaws. Now, Fatal Flaws is actually a very interesting film because it features interviews from both sides of the issue. We have sadly the leaders of the euthanasia lobby being featured. The guy is being interviewed who runs the euthanasia clinic. One of the fathers, if you want to call him that, of the euthanasia movement in the Netherlands is featured. So we have both sides, as well as we have the real life stories of people who experienced euthanasia in their families or were faced with euthanasia in their own lives. And so you have this collage of stories, which is very powerful because it shows that it's self-evident that the concept of euthanasia is fatally flawed. So, for instance, the story of Candace Lewis is featured in Fatal Flaws, and you'll see it comes up pretty early in the story. And Candace is from Newfoundland, and she recently passed away, a natural death though. But Candace was born with multiple disabilities. So here the interview was done in 2017, but Candace was being pressured by the doctors at the hospital in Newfoundland to ask for euthanasia. She wasn't asking for it. She wasn't saying, I want this. She wasn't. But her family, her mother and herself were being pressured to euthanasia. And we simply start by asking the question, well, how many other stories like this are there? So, I want you to do two things when you're watching Fatal Flaws. I want you to be thinking of, well, do I know of another story? Have I heard of another story? Do I have a friend, a family member, or myself who's directly experienced similar type stories? And should we need to be sharing these? But secondly, the question is how do I protect others from euthanasia and assisted suicide now that it's legal? And we start thinking of these things. And there's many more stories, obviously, in Fatal Flaws. But you're going to watch the film, so you don't need to listen to me describing them all to you.
And you're right that these stories are really important. This issue is really relevant right now because of Bill C-7, which was recently introduced. Alex, Can you briefly describe what Bill C-7 would do if it was passed?
So Bill C-7 is our government's quote response to a Quebec court decision. So you might remember during the election that a Quebec court, now this wasn't the Court of Appeal, so this wasn't the High Court of Quebec, but a Quebec court struck down the part of the euthanasia law requiring that a person's natural death must be reasonably foreseeable. So by striking down that portion of the law, the government had to appeal the decision, and then they refused to appeal the decision, meaning the decision, if it's not appealed, it becomes law. So the government decided to amend the law, but they went further than that. So first of all, let me explain to you what this does. When you remove that one's natural death must be reasonably foreseeable. That means euthanasia then can be applied to someone who's clearly not terminally ill. They are not dying. They might have physical or psychological suffering and other whatever medical conditions that are deemed to be by the physician acceptable, but they're not dying, and they would now qualify by euthanasia. But it does something else because, so I'm just giving you the basics here, because the original law said that you could have euthanasia for physical or psychological suffering. Now, psychological suffering means listening to Alex too long. No, it means actually that you have a psychological condition that you feel that your suffering is too great. But the law then said originally that your natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. So you couldn't have euthanasia for psychological suffering alone. But when you strike that portion from the law, suddenly euthanasia for psychological suffering alone becomes an option, which is pretty concerning in my country of Canada that we're doing this. But secondly, what they did is they also decided to change the law. So in the original law said that you had to be competent at the time of death. So that means that if you asked for euthanasia, but then when they came to do it, maybe 10 days later, they came to lethally inject you, if you're now incapable of responding now and understanding the nature of the question, they couldn't inject you. You had to be competent. You had to be fully capable of being able to say yes, right? And so what they're doing is they're changing the law with Bill C-7 to say that if somebody was approved for euthanasia but has now become incompetent, we can still lethally inject them. Now, if you're thinking, well, you know, Alex, they were already approved. Well, let's think about this. There was a case in the Netherlands just a couple of years ago of a woman who had asked for euthanasia in her power of attorney document. She had put it, and what happened is now she's in a nursing home and she has dementia, and the family and the doctor decide, well, you know, she had requested this in her power of attorney. We're going to go ahead and lethally inject her. So some of you who watched my news or watched the information will remember the story. The woman resisted. So they came to do the euthanasia and the woman resisted. So they put in her coffee, I'm drinking some coffee here, they put in her coffee a sedative in order to keep her from resisting, and she continued to resist, so the doctor had the family hold her down as she was lethally injected. This is the kind of thing you're talking about when you allow euthanasia without being able to consent at the time. So therefore, it's a situation where you lose your right to change your mind if you're going to allow that. The law changes from being requiring consent at the time of death to losing your right to change your mind. This is a very concerning thing. And they did one other thing. They decided to create a two-tier law. So they decided to get rid of the 10-day waiting period for somebody who is dying. So let's say you actually are nearing death. Let's say you had cancer, whatever it might be, and they determined that your natural death is reasonably foreseeable, whatever that means. Now, Josie, it's nothing personal, but I think all of our natural deaths are reasonably foreseeable. Nonetheless, they waive the 10-day waiting period for those people who are deemed to be actually dying per se, whatever that means in this case. So that means you could then go to your doctor in the morning, get approved for euthanasia, and die in the afternoon. But for those people who are not dying, meaning the ones who are clearly, they might have some sort of health issues, but they're not dying at all, that they would have to wait, there'd be a waiting period for them to die by euthanasia. So that's what they did with the law. They created this two-tiered system, which to me, of course, is unconstitutional. You can't have a two-tiered system within a system of delivering, whether it be healthcare or whether it be lethal injection. In Canada, the courts don't allow two-tier systems, so I don't know why they're thinking that'll be acceptable by the courts. My point comes down to, though, for most people, they'll be able to go to their doctor in the morning and die in the afternoon, which is insane. It's an insane situation, and also people who are incompetent will die by euthanasia. And there's one other thing, as bad as it might seem, you're probably saying, Schadenberg, why would I want to watch the film when this is such a bad situation with Bill C-7? It is insane. So Bill C-7 claims, because they did their polling ahead of time, and they found that Canadians didn't want euthanasia for people with mental illness. Well, you know, whatever. I guess they're saying that people with mental illness aren't capable of consenting, so I guess we shouldn't kill them. But anyway, so the law then has this little line saying that mental illness is not defined as a disease, a disability, etc. And they're acting like that is going to prevent euthanasia for mental illness, when in fact it doesn't. So what they've done is they've thrown us a bone. They've said, oh, well, but we're going to prevent euthanasia for mental illness. But in fact, the bill doesn't actually prevent euthanasia for mental illness, because mental illness is defined within this whole thing of psychological suffering. So, in fact, it doesn't actually do it. They would have had to redefine psychological suffering to actually accomplish that goal, which they did not do. So, what I'm getting to you is Bill C-7 is really bad, really, really crazy. If it's passed, it would make us the worst jurisdiction in the world, and it needs to be stopped. And just to give you some more insight, we can stop it because it's completely unnecessary. I don't think there's anything necessary about euthanasia, but don't get me wrong. The bill is unnecessary because the government had announced that they were going to do a 5-year review starting in June of 2020, a 5-year review of the euthanasia law. Now, the 5th anniversary then of euthanasia would be in June of 2021. So if they're going to do a 5-year review with the idea of amending the law, why are we amending the law now? Does that make any sense? Now, they might say, but we're reacting to the Quebec court decision. Well, whether we like it or not, they did not appeal the Quebec court decision. So whether we like it or not, and I don't like it, but I can't change what's done, the Quebec court decision is law. You don't need a bill to implement the Quebec court decision because you didn't appeal the decision. That's just how it works. So these other expansions they're adding to the law, to me, is ridiculous, and it's not based upon really a rule of law. It's based on, well, we're going to expand this because this is part of our political policy of where we should go. And I think this is becoming very insane. They're also selling it to us in a lie because they're saying there's oversight of the law. I'm sorry, there is no oversight of this law. So you need to be talking to your members of parliament. If you've got an NDP member of parliament, talk to them and say, hey, have you read this bill? Have you actually read it and what it does? It's about a lie, really. And so why don't we stop Bill C-7? Why don't we do the 5-year review? And hopefully by that point, somebody wakes up and realizes that this has been a bad, bad policy and revisit the whole question.
Mm-hmm. You're right. I think that this is insane and it's extremely concerning. So in light of this proposed legislation, is there anything that viewers should be paying special attention to when they watch Fatal Flaws?
Well, I think the Fatal Flaws issue really shows you, the video really shows you how the law really doesn't have safeguards per se, and that it's all really about a lie. So when you're looking at this, you're hearing these stories about people, real people. Now, Fatal Flaws itself is focused on the Netherlands and the US, even though Candace Lewis is in it. Now, why did we focus on the Netherlands and the US? Well, because in the US, the euthanasia-assisted suicide debate is alive and well, and at the same time, most states in the US, it's illegal. Mm-hmm. The Netherlands has a 20-year history of euthanasia. Therefore, it's developed down the road. What we were trying to show Canadians and Americans is the road we're on is the same as the Dutch road. That in fact, how the law began and what it became are two different things. Now, sadly speaking, a third video probably needs to be done now because in fact, Canada has become the worst example in the world of what you call incremental extensions or expanding the law. Because in the Netherlands, the law expanded, but not by changing it, but by reinterpreting its meaning. That's how the Netherlands law is expanded, right? Whereas in Canada, we've got a government that is just all excited about expanding euthanasia. So they've not only reinterpreted meanings, like natural death is reasonably foreseeable has been totally reinterpreted, but on top of it, they're expanding the law quickly. So, the fact of it is that what we hear in these stories, though, is really the reality of a human life experience. And that's what's important as human beings. We recognize in a human life experience that euthanasia and assisted suicide is not only a flawed concept, fatally flawed, but that in fact, it's naturally flawed. It's a concept you should never go down the road and accept because it's only going to end up in this direction. I'll say one other thing, and I know we're coming to an end of time. Euthanasia has a type of, how would you say, it affects us emotionally as a culture. It creates a change in an attitude towards people. And I'm going to say this because we've been going through this COVID-19 issue, and that's why you're at home right now interviewing me from your home, etc. We've got an attitude problem now towards life and death that's affected a lot of elderly people in our culture. And one of the reasons we've seen so much death in our nursing homes is because our attitude towards these elderly people was not based upon equality. It was based upon we don't do certain things anymore for these people. And I've written about this, and I know I'm throwing this at you right now and making people think about this, but there was a lot of people who were in nursing homes who were not provided an opportunity of recovery because they were never transferred to hospitals, especially early on. We were afraid that our hospitals would become overrun with people with COVID-19, and therefore certain people, we had these protocols that we designed, whether they were completely intentional or whether they were accidental or just attitudinal, that we denied these people an opportunity of treatment. So what happened is a lot of them died in the nursing homes without receiving even an opportunity to possibly recover. So what I'm saying to you is that the cultural attitudes have shifted because of the killing that we're doing. And euthanasia does that because you're now valuing certain lives as being not worth living or different than maybe yours or mine per se.
Yes. I imagine that there might be some viewers today who think that, I tuned into the virtual National March for Life because I'm concerned about abortion, but maybe they're not sure how they feel about the euthanasia issue. But as you just mentioned, the reason why we should care about both of them is because they all concern the sanctity of human life. As pro-lifers, we believe that all human beings are equally valuable. And so if you allow some human beings to be treated worse, as if their lives are not worth living, then the whole human race is affected by that. I'm not sure if you have any other comment to add on
Well, what they're going to throw at you is this is all about choice, right? It's all about my choice. It's all about my freedom. And they're going to say to you, well, in the case of euthanasia, I'm asking for it, so this is my choice. But in fact, it's all really an illusion when you consider how the nature of the human person is. It's normal for me as a human being when I'm going through a difficult medical time to feel down. It's normal if I've become in a situation where I'm feeling lonely, hopeless. These are normal human feelings that when you're going through a difficult time. For instance, I've got this image behind me, and it was developed by the Disability Lobby, and it shows on the one side a euthanasia clinic, and on the other side a suicide prevention clinic. And the suicide prevention has the stairs, so of course the person in the wheelchair can't go up the stairs, whereas the euthanasia clinic, it has a nice ramp for the wheelchair. The idea, of course, is that the whole concept of euthanasia then changes our attitudes towards certain people. But in this, the whole concept towards myself, when I'm going through a difficult time, I become then a victim of euthanasia because I start feeling that my life is not worth living. Now, and we get down to the very brass tacks. What is euthanasia? Euthanasia is done by lethal injection. It's about killing somebody. We can call it medical aid in dying. We can say, oh, it's about helping people. It's about end of life, treatment. Some of them want, because the euthanasia lobby wants it to be seen as treatment. They want it to be seen as care. Give me a break. It's about injecting someone with lethal drugs. And when you inject me with lethal drugs, what makes you think that was my choice or my autonomy? What makes you think that was the reality? And even then, who was the one who made the decision? According to the law, it's the doctor or the nurse practitioner who decides. I might request it. I might request it in my time of sorrow, in my time of need, in my time of depression, in my time of loneliness and hopelessness. I might request it. But death is then inflicted upon me upon someone who says, I agree, your life is not worth living. That's what euthanasia is about. It's about abandonment. It's about killing. Call it what you want. It's about changing a cultural attitude towards the value of human life.
You're absolutely right, Alex, as always. I'd like to thank you very much for sharing that expertise with us. I'm sure a lot of people found that very valuable and important information. And so without further ado, I'd like to present our film of this evening, Fatal Flaws, Legalizing Assisted Death. I hope you all find it informative.
Physician in the middle of the night came to my room. He said, "Are you aware of how sick you are?" And I said, "Yes."
They call it a lot of different things. Death with dignity, doctor-assisted death, medical aid in dying. Those are all pretty turns of phrase.
Well, it's a murder on request. It's a suicide with help.
The ugly truth is, we're talking about giving doctors the legal right to kill their patients.
He was very politely asking me if I wanted to die, and he would have made it happen.
She said, I want the pills. Give me the pills.
It's the ultimate help.
The ultimate help.
Yeah.
That phrase scares the hell out of me.
It started with the terminally ill, but in some places, if you're old or disabled or depressed, a doctor might try to talk you into killing yourself.
They just killed my mother. I said, it's my mom. Don't take her away.
Some doctors have had enough.
Instead of addressing his depression, she gave him the means to kill himself.
My job as a doctor is to alleviate their suffering. It's not to be a vending machine when they make a good, rational argument that they'd be better off dead.
But the laws keep expanding.
Will this also apply to patients with psychiatric disorders? Will this also apply to patients with Alzheimer's disease? Will this even apply to patients with advanced Alzheimer's disease? Will this apply to babies? Will this apply to children?
I've traveled across oceans and continents to see if this debate is really about compassion. Is it really about freedom? About dignity? Is everything we've heard about euthanasia dead wrong? My name is Kevin Dunn. I worked in media most of my life. It was my father who got me hooked. He worked in television back in the early days. A few years ago, Dad was diagnosed with colon cancer. The treatments were almost as bad as the disease. Dad's worries about his illness and concern about becoming a burden made me wonder. Now that assisted dying laws are legal in this country, what are they really saying to people with a terminal illness? And now that doctors have the legal right to end the life of a patient, what is this saying to the House of Medicine? And how do these laws affect society over time? It's impossible to miss the news reports about patients asking for help and dying. They're heartbreaking stories. But is there a side to this issue we haven't heard yet? Where does it end? And have we gone too far? My 50,000-kilometer journey begins in the remote village of St. Anthony on the island of Newfoundland to meet Sheila Lewis and her daughter Candace. I saw a story about them on the news one night. It bothered me so much I wanted to talk to them myself.
Hi there, how are you?
On that one.
Oh wow, those are beautiful.
Candace was born with cerebral palsy and spina bifida. Sheila says she took Candace to the hospital last year to save her life. The doctors pretty much told her to abandon hope, but Sheila wasn't about to abandon her daughter.
If I had to go ahead and do what the doctors wanted me to do, I wouldn't have had her.
And what was that?
Well, they wanted me to do assisted suicide death on her. She got sick here at home. We got the ambulance. When we got her to the hospital, she was having seizures. They had to give her medication, take her heart rate down. Her heart rate was very high, 170. This doctor that was seeing her first, and he came in and he told me that her kidney wasn't in the right spot. He told me the lower parts of her lungs had collapsed, so they admitted her. And the next day, when he came in, he talked to her, and then he took me in the hallway and he just stood me up against the wall and he told me about assisted suicide death was legal in Canada. And I said, well, he asked, did I know? And I said, no. And then he said he was all for it. And I said, well, that was your choice. And I told him I wasn't interested in anything to do with assisted suicide death. And he told me, he said I was being selfish. And he told me that he was leaving and he would be back in January and he wanted to assist me in doing this. And I said, I'm not interested. So I more or less walked away from her. She heard everything. Yeah. And
this is your story. Yeah. You said a couple of things on the news story. I remember they said, did you want to die? And what did you say?
I don't.
You don't. And yet they were talking to you about dying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that's good thing for a doctor or bad?
Bad.
Yeah. Why?
I don't know. I don't want to.
Like, not once did she ever say to them, I want to end my life. Not once. And this doctor that came in and next day after he told me about the assisted suicide death and stuck his face down in hers and said, do you know how sick you are? And I'm just like, and when I got his eyes contact, I went my eyes like that to get out in the hallway, and I told him, I said, don't you ever pull something like that again. They had us told me that she was dying. I believed them. They were the doctors, and she was so sick, so. But I told her if she wanted to go, it was good, she could go. But she didn't, oh God, honey. But she didn't want me to be alone. Don't cry. It's all done now, it's over.
Yeah.
We just don't want it to happen to anybody else, hey?
No.
Don't want another family to go through this.
In the first years after Canada passed its medical aid in dying law, nearly 2,000 people chose to have their life ended by a doctor. Candace and Sheila's story made me wonder how those choices are really being made. The way society looks at death is changing. We've even sanitized death. We make jokes about it, make movies about it. Video games let players put people away as if they were rodents. One might argue that we have become so desensitized by the culture that even human life and death have become matters of personal choice. As of 2018, lawmakers in 5 countries and 6 U.S. jurisdictions have legalized doctor-assisted death. Proponents argue that people should have the right to choose the way they die. Critics say that choice is an illusion and a recipe for elder abuse and coercion when people are at their most vulnerable. It's under debate in almost every country in the world, and the United States is at a tipping point.
So, what lessons can be learned from countries who have already passed assisted dying laws? So we're here in Amsterdam, in the beautiful Netherlands. Some people call it the most liberalized country in the world.
The only thing more famous than this country's windmills are its progressive attitudes towards sex, relaxed rules for marijuana use, and laws that allow for euthanasia under certain criteria. Criteria that one Dutch journalist says just keep expanding.
Boundaries of euthanasia in the Netherlands seem to be blurred, and the situation seems to be shifting. And that's worrying.
Gerbert van Lonen says he's neutral on the issue of euthanasia, but he's concerned about where the law is heading.
We are discussing, just to mention a couple of issues, euthanasia for children, euthanasia for patients with an advanced stage of Alzheimer's disease, physician-assisted suicide for psychiatric patients, assisted suicide for people who are not ill but who are wary of life, who have the feeling that their lives are completed.
Who's telling the other side of the story?
I'm afraid no one.
Euthanasia for children? For people with Alzheimer's? People who are tired of life? What's going on in the Netherlands? I wanted to find out for myself. Robert Schurig is a family physician. When we interviewed him, he was serving as CEO for the NVVE, or the Voluntary End-of-Life Society, whose website asks, do you have a death wish?
What you have to understand that in the Netherlands, we're very liberal. Yeah. And we think it's your life, you have to decide upon your own life.
According to the NVVE website, they have 165,000 members, and their numbers are growing. It's Holland's assisted suicide lobby group.
200 years ago, you wouldn't have needed the discussion about euthanasia because everybody would have died already.
It's true, people died earlier centuries ago, but euthanasia isn't a new idea. The original Hippocratic Oath, written more than 2,000 years ago, specifically forbids doctors from administering poison even when asked to do so. And in the Netherlands, they've been talking about euthanasia for nearly 50 years. In 1973, a doctor ended her elderly mother's life. She could have been charged with murder under the law, but she was given no jail time. In the 1990s, Dutch lawmakers got in on the discussion.
We had one member of High Court who said, well, whenever someone reaches a certain age, they should have a last will pill available to take their own life.
That was here in The Hague when Supreme Court Justice Hugh Drion first introduced the idea of a doctor-assisted suicide for people over the age of 70.
In 1991, Dr. Bedouin Chabot made history by giving a lethal dose of medicine to a patient who wasn't suffering any terminal medical condition.
Many know you as the pioneer, if you will, of euthanasia here in the Netherlands. Does that title strike you strange?
I've got used to that, and in fact, in 1991, this was an exceptional thing to do, as there was no law in sight. 10 years before the law, this woman came to me asking for a physician aid in dying. I dislike the word euthanasia. I prefer the PAD thing. And she was a 50-year-old, healthy social worker with many friends, but she had lost her 2 kids under dramatic circumstances. The one by young cancer disease and the other shot himself after his first love dropped him. And so after that she didn't want to live anymore. In terms of today, we would call this purely existential suffering.
Dr. Chabot consulted 4 psychiatrists who were split on what to do. 2 said she should be given therapy. The other 2 said there was no cure for a parent's grief.
I came to her house. We had, with a friend, a GP, a personal friend, and she was together with her best friend, a woman, and I handed her the drink, saying, I hope you'll flush this through the toilet now, because you don't have to proceed because I'm now here. She said, oh no. And she went on her bed, we were sitting next to it, and she was very happy to drink it, and then she died within half an hour in the arms of her best friend.
And what was the verdict in the end?
Guilty without punishment, which is very special for your country, I guess, because if you're guilty, you should be punished.
So the law was clearly being broken, but public sentiment was clearly shifting.
These and other cases paved the way for the Euthanasia Act of 2002, which came into effect to regulate the ending of life by a physician at the request of a patient. Have you had people come to ask you for euthanasia?
Yes.
Have you performed euthanasia?
Yes.
Robert Jonquier is a retired Dutch family doctor who is now executive director of the World Federation of Right to Die Societies. He admits that the reason people are choosing to die is changing.
When we started in the Netherlands, our law, our euthanasia practice and our law, 85 to 90% of the cases were terminal physical situations. We have developed the last 15 years a situation where it became more and more clear that it was not about termination of terminal illness, but it was termination of suffering. And you can suffer of many things. You can also suffer from psychiatric situations, from existential situations, from dementia or whatever. I mean,
but doesn't that scare you? Doesn't it like to me it scares me. It scares me to think that it's going to keep on moving and moving and moving.
I don't believe it. I mean, that's the big difference and the big discussions we have around the world. I mean, the slippery slope argument. Once you start legalizing the situation, the option to euthanize a patient when he asks in a terminal situation, next you will see that doctors will go around killing patients when they have dementia, things like that.
Does that happen?
I don't think it is the simple way I describe it. That's not what's happening.
The slippery slope Dr. Jonquière is talking about might not scare him, but the way the regulations keep expanding terrifies me. And I'm not alone. Critics say these laws open the door to abuse of elderly patients when they are at their most vulnerable.
My mom, if she had been left in hospital without me visiting her and fighting for her, she wouldn't be here.
When somebody wanted to give up on you, you didn't give up.
I'm not.
My mom is 94 years old. She had a slip and a fall, and she was taken into hospital. And the only thing that appeared wrong with her was that she had an infection. Within the first day, she responded very well to the antibiotics. She started to improve. But she had increased her pain enormously, and there was nothing to do about it except to administer morphine. And so they said, well, we suspect maybe she's got something wrong, a blockage or something. The discussion at the time was, well, yeah, you know, we have a lot of things we have to do, and we don't know if it's worth it. Because of this supposedly blockage, they stopped to feed her and they stopped administering water. And to me, it was looking like they were stopping and not looking and not going further to find out what is wrong with her. And unfortunately, my mom at that moment said, I don't want to live anymore. I cannot eat, I don't get water, I have pain, you're a moving mirror, I cannot live like this anymore. The nurse took this through to the doctor as a request for end of life. And there was a meeting with my mom to which I was not invited. And my mom told me that they had discussed end of life.
And they said that only 48 hours and no euthanasia.
So what about a second opinion?
So I called for a second opinion, I called for geriatric doctor. And so we redid the discussion over the end of life story with my mom. Yes, through that second opinion, by bringing in that second doctor, we managed to stop that movement of the original doctor to accept and say, it's over. She said, this lady has got a reason to live. Immediately, he said, he promised me he would check whether there was a blockage first. There was no blockage. She was allowed anything to drink and eat that she wanted. She just improved after that. Really now she's in a nursing home, and since she's been there, she's just one of the most popular old ladies in that home. You might say, there's an old lady, she's 94, she's lived a good life. Which is what they said to me, why are you bothering? I said, it's my mom. Don't take her away.
Now, Helen's mother, she was in her 90s. I have to ask myself, would that first doctor, had he known that she was in her 80s or 70s or even 60s, would he have made a different diagnosis?
And how would the story have ended if there was nobody there to fight for her?
At the moment they gave her the injection, they said they gave it so that she could go to sleep. But in fact, they just killed my mother.
Marguerite Vandervalk's mother was admitted to hospital for pneumonia, but she says that's not what killed her.
I drove to the place where the hospital is, and I got a private call from a private number. And there was a voicemail from a doctor from the ER. I called him back, and then he said, you don't have to hurry, because you will not find her alive if you come to the hospital. And he said, yeah, we had to give her an injection, so she will be in a coma, but it will be a coma, she will not wake up. My daughter was with me, and well, we drove to the hospital, and the doctor arrived. It was the one from the intensive care unit. He said, yeah, your mother was very ill when she arrived in the hospital. And I had to decide what to do. Well, we didn't treat her, but we give her an injection that she went into coma because she was so oppressed. So I said, but why? Why didn't you intubate her? And he said, I called the GP, and the GP said she was lonely, she was depressed, she didn't want to go out of her house, and she wanted to stay in her house, she didn't want to go to a home. Therefore, we decided that it would be better not to treat her anymore. And my daughter was in the room, and she said, what did you tell her when you gave her that injection? And the assistant said, yeah, we said, you have difficulties breathing, so we give you something to sleep. But she didn't die. She went on and on, hour after hour after hour. And then, well, we went home to have a little rest. The doctor called me in the middle of the night and said she had passed away. And I said, the cause of death, what's the cause of death? And she said pneumonia and heart failure. But I thought, I was laying in my bed and thought, no, that was not. It was that little injection you gave her. So I asked for an interview with the doctor of the intensive care who had made a decision. And I said to him, it was my mother. She was not that ill that I thought she would die within a few days. And he said, the decision to let her go or to let her live, you couldn't make because you were not there, so I made it. They said my mother was depressed, but she was not depressed.
They say that self-determination is what it's all about. But in this case, was it self-determination?
No, absolutely not. The decision is not for a doctor who said, well, long and intensive care, yeah, not good in society, okay, put her in that room, she's going to die. Next patient.
Some politicians in the Netherlands are wondering if the country's laws are becoming more dangerous than the diseases.
See the slippery slope in our country.
Kies van der Stal says he has a warning for the rest of the world.
From my point of view, it's a very important task of government to protect the life of the citizens. And what we now see is undermining of the rights of life, undermining of vulnerable people or medically fragile or socially vulnerable, that it's no longer evident that their lives is worthy.
You had this law in 2002, the law that was passed. How do you explain it to people, the slippery slope, in very, very simple terms?
Each year there are more situations brought under this euthanasia law. In the last 10 years, now a growing number from two groups, that was people with dementia, and the other group is people with psychological or psychiatric suffering. That's not at the end of their life, but there were two categories that are expanding now.
In the past 10 years, the number of people seeking euthanasia in the Netherlands has more than tripled, from 2,000 to 6,000 annually. 200 of those are people with dementia and mental illness.
Euthanasia now represents 5% of all deaths annually here in the Netherlands. Now, this doesn't seem to bother Dr. Schabat, who is the pioneer of euthanasia here, although he does fear the genie is out of the bottle.
We do slide down with demented, brain diseases and psychiatric cases. Over 2016, these two groups together were 200 of the 6,000. That's small. That's always the argument the review committee says. Don't worry, Mr. Schabat, it's only 200 cases and we do 6,000. What is the percentage? It's less than 2% or so.
So that's the way they reassure the public. But I say, well, it may be only 1 or 2%, but look at the steep rise in 7 years. Look at the percentage done by the life-ending clinic without a treatment relationship. And then you see that people who are fighting their fear of life and fighting against death flock to the life-ending clinic. And then you see that there is, in those brain diseases, a slippery slope.
End-of-life clinics like this one in the Netherlands are increasingly popular options for patients whose doctors will not agree to end their lives.
You're the experts in euthanasia.
Yes, absolutely. We are a second chance for a person that is not having the possibility to have his euthanasia wish honored by the own GP in particular.
Does your organization work in consultation with the health department or the hospitals, or are you standalone?
No, we're a standalone organization, fully independent. And it was notified that there were a group of people who had difficulties to have a response for their requests from their own doctor.
Can you give us a ratio of how many people call, request a euthanasia at the end-of-life clinic?
Well, roughly it's 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3. 1/3 we can honor the request. So 1/3 will have euthanasia.
How much time will the doctor spend with the patient who's requested this?
Normally that's an interview of about 1 to 1.5 hours. And on average, 4 or 5 of these interviews are being done before they end up in the conclusion that they will provide euthanasia.
How does the end-of-life clinic deal with psychiatric patients?
That's a rather complex matter. And that means that it can take us 12, 15 visits and meetings before we come to a conclusion. Another reason that I'd like to give is a person with dementia. He was really very well prepared for the moment that he said, there is a moment that I will lose my capabilities of thinking, understanding what is happening, speaking. And before that moment is there, for then it will be irreversible, and I will not be able to express my opinion. Before that moment, I want to die, which is the situation with dementia.
So they fear what is to come.
That's in particular in dementia is that situation. Yeah.
Is it fair to say then autonomy, self-determination rules the day?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's no one else telling that you should have euthanasia. It's you asking for euthanasia. And only after a thorough investigation and to find out if it meets the legal criteria, then the doctors and the nurses working for the end-of-life clinic will provide euthanasia. It's the ultimate help.
The ultimate help.
Yeah.
That phrase scares the hell out of me.
Oversight is a big concern in the Netherlands. In 2016, the media reported that a doctor was charged after euthanizing a patient who had to be physically restrained by the family. The patient had said they wanted to be euthanized in case of dementia, but physically fought back when the doctor was giving the lethal injection. This is something that euthanasia advocates are even upset about.
My simple answer is that is a crime. That is just a criminal act by a medical professional. Because she said, I don't want it, and he still did it. That's murder. Simple as that. Just 10 seconds before I put the injection in, I say, look in the eyes, and I say, is this what you really want? And if you say, I'm hesitating, I stop immediately. And maybe after 5 minutes, you say, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing which is happening. And if the patient has written down whatever, if you orally say no, then no is the answer.
Dr. Jacquier says it's murder, but a legal review found the euthanasia was performed in good faith. In good faith? Critics worry that there are more stories we aren't hearing.
What we see is that there are more situations that there was a declaration of their will to have euthanasia when they should have problems with dementia later on in their lives. Sometimes the people are indeed given something in their applesauce or in the coffee to make them quiet and then to give the deadly injection.
Some people express their wish to be euthanized in advanced directives, also called living wills. The problem is, people can change their mind, but the living wills are considered legally binding. 220 Dutch doctors recently published an advertisement in a national newspaper saying our moral reluctance to end the life of a defenseless human being is too big. The doctors believe it's wrong to kill a patient based on a statement they can no longer confirm. Rob Bruntink is a journalist covering palliative care in the Netherlands. He says what terminal patients are looking for is comfort and compassion, not a way to kill themselves.
They have this written will or advance directive about euthanasia, but when it comes to a certain point, their wishes to have this euthanasia doesn't exist anymore when they feel the care and the attention and love and warmth that people can give to a patient in a hospice.
He says euthanasia is increasingly becoming a catch-all solution for problems society would rather not tackle.
Because you have to talk about all those things like difficult stuff, hope, suffering, a lot of nasty symptoms. Euthanasia is kind of a clean subject. Well, you suffer, well, we can end it. Well, cool, let's do it. So I guess that's one of the reasons why we talk a lot about euthanasia and almost nothing about palliative care in general.
But despite the concerns, euthanasia is becoming more popular and more accepted in the Netherlands. And there's no better proof of that than the annual Week of Euthanasia, organized by the NVVE Voluntary End-of-Life Society. Most people come to Amsterdam for a holiday. I'm here for Euthanasia Week.
I've never understood this Euthanasia Week. It's very odd in my view, but it's every year Euthanasia Week is being organized by the Right to Die laws or the Dying in Dignity Association in the Netherlands. And most of the time what you see is documentaries on television of proponents of euthanasia. So every year there are new documentaries where euthanasia tends to be depicted in a very positive way.
Is it news or propaganda?
It's propaganda, yeah, sure. We talk about euthanasia for about 30 years already, almost daily. So we don't need a week of euthanasia in Holland. We have almost 51 weeks of euthanasia. Maybe we have 1 week of palliative care.
Euthanasia Week held a symposium specifically for people under 40 years old. Under Dutch law, anybody over 16 can ask for euthanasia, and under certain circumstances they will consider it for children as young as 12. And under the Groningen Protocol, even newborns can be euthanized under certain criteria. One of the big reasons why we came was this youth symposium hosted by the NVVE. I'm going to read you a little piece from their advertisement. It says, euthanasia and young people is not an obvious combination. Therefore, keep NVVE Youth on your calendar this year for another symposium.
Why is it important to get the young people involved in this debate?
Because young people have in several ways to deal with end of life. Their grandfather, grandmother sometimes passes away, so they have questions about euthanasia or assisted dying. We don't promote people to take everything into their own hands, but whenever they want to, we provide them with information. What's the best way to do it?
One of those young people who came to the conference is Aurelia Brouwers. She came to the symposium because she wants to die.
So Aurelia, what is today all about? Why is it important for you to be here today?
I'm very interested in euthanasia, and I have severe
Psychiatric?
Psychiatric problems, and I want to have euthanasia because I have problems for about 13 years. And I have a death wish for about 6 years. And I've tried to get euthanasia for about 4 years, and I don't get it.
You don't get it.
And I just want to fight for it. And I even go so far to get into politics. To fight for a better law for all patients for all psychiatric patients to get a better chance to get euthanasia if they are not treatable anymore.
We've just met. We've connected. You and me. We've connected.
Yeah.
And you seem happy. I mean, smiling.
But that's the problem with psychiatric patients.
Yeah.
Most of them seem happy.
Yes.
And so most people, most doctors, they think, oh, they look happy. So we don't give them euthanasia, but you don't know what happens when they got home.
Right.
Then maybe when I go home, I go to the bathroom, I get a knife, and I cut my skin now.
And what if tomorrow they said, we're going to give you as much support as you need, and we found a cure, we've found something. Would you change your mind?
I don't think there's any cure for me left.
No hope.
No, I don't believe there is any.
I have to ask the question, who has failed her? Has the healthcare system failed her? I can't help but think of her and just see how beautiful she is. I want to give you a big hug.
You may.
Okay, good. Because, you know, to me, this isn't treatment. This is abandoning someone in their time of greatest need. If euthanasia for the terminally ill leads to euthanasia for the non-terminally ill, which leads to euthanasia for the psychologically ill, where does it end? How about euthanasia for people who are simply tired of being alive? In fact, right now in Parliament, they're discussing a new law that would allow completely healthy people who are tired of life to end their life with the help of a physician.
There are two proposals now, one by the government and one by a liberal opposition party, and both want to enact assisted suicide for people who are not ill, who are not suffering from any illness, but who have the feeling that they are weary of life, that their life is completed, that their life has become pointless. The one proposal is of a party who say this should be only elderly people should qualify for this kind of assisted suicide. The other proposal says no, there shouldn't be any age limit. An 18-year-old girl or boy should also qualify for assisted suicide if he or she believes that their lives are pointless.
In the Netherlands, they call it the completed life.
The discussion about completed life is about relatively healthy older people who are just tired of life.
Dr. Els van Wijngaarden is a postdoctoral researcher in the Netherlands. She's a neutral investigator who has written a book called Ready to Give Up on Life.
It's a different discussion because it's not about medical grounds anymore.
Many of the people she interviewed for her book wanted a better life, but had given up hope of it ever happening.
A lot of people talked about, for example, the pain of not mattering anymore, not being needed anymore, feeling redundant, being a burden to other people.
The study found that the participants' wish to die had to do with everyday realities such as fear, sadness, loneliness, and depression. There was a strong desire to feel valued and appreciated.
If death seems like the only logical solution for these otherwise healthy people, what did the study propose?
It is very important to really listen, in a non-judging, open way to people, to provide a kind of accepting climate, how to say, or have really an accepting attitude towards their stories, so that people really feel recognized.
We asked euthanasia advocates who would qualify for the completed life under this proposed law.
People who are weary of life might have some problems with hearing or seeing, but they don't qualify for the medical diagnosis involved in the euthanasia law. We noticed that these elderly people who were weary of life didn't get their wish to have euthanasia granted with the physicians, only when they had severe complaints together with growing old, like a lot of pain with joints, etc., and incontinence.
Arthritis? Failing vision and hearing? Incontinence? Aren't these fairly normal aspects of growing older? Are these now becoming the rationale for a life not worthy of living?
If that existential suffering is worse enough, and you say, I don't want to do that, and you can convince me, and I have no options to make it better, then you actually comply with the criteria.
But why is he coming to the doctor if it's not a medical problem?
Because the doctor is the only one who has the key to the cupboard where the right medication is.
Not everyone is convinced. The Dutch Patients Association is fighting against the very idea of the completed life.
It's not a completed life. It means it's uncompleted life. Their life is not completed. Yeah. And that's a problem. And I don't know how to make a new law for these people. I'm very afraid what it will mean for people, for elderly people. Because when we should have such kind of law, all people are thinking, well, when this is possible, what does it say about my life, the worth of my life? It would be terrible.
The completed life is an awfully sanitary way of saying somebody deserves to die. Language is critically important in this debate. Look at the title of this book, originally published in 1920, Allowing the Destruction of a Life Unworthy of Life. The book advocated euthanasia for the elderly, the mentally ill, and the disabled. The book was a guide for the infamous T4 program, a designation for anybody they thought deserved to die. Many did die. Is that where this is going? In Belgium, euthanasia has been legal since 2002. In 2013, over 1,000 euthanasias were performed without patient consent, and the situation has only gotten worse. It's become too much for some euthanasia advocates. In September 2017, a respected neurologist resigned from the commission that oversees euthanasia in Belgium. Media reports say he quit after a family doctor euthanized a woman with dementia who had never asked to die. The doctor says the medical killing violated the law and was a sign that advocates were defending euthanasia in any circumstance. If that's how far things have gone in Europe, what does the future hold for jurisdictions that are now considering euthanasia laws? As I prepared to head back to North America, I asked the people I'd met in the Netherlands what advice they'd give to places like the USA.
Don't be naive. Don't think that this will stay limited to patients with cancer. It will. What we have seen here in the Netherlands and in Belgium is that the euthanasia practice has broadened. And it is very difficult indeed to limit euthanasia once you have started. So don't be naive.
Gerbert van Lonen wishes more questions were asked when euthanasia was first debated in Holland.
Will this also apply to patients with psychiatric disorders? Will this also apply to patients with Alzheimer's disease? Will this even apply to patients with advanced Alzheimer's disease? Will this apply to babies? Will this apply to children? Those are the questions we are debating right now in the Netherlands. And we should have asked ourselves before we started, not afterwards.
It's a good argument against each euthanasia or assisted suicide law, for it don't stop. When you make this first step, new steps will follow. So My advice to all countries what have not such law is don't do it. Learn from the Dutch situation.
The next front line in this life or death battle is the United States of America. California, Colorado, the District of Columbia, Oregon, Vermont, Washington State, and now Hawaii all have assisted dying laws, along with Montana, which has a defense of consent provision. And as of 2018, similar laws are being developed, discussed, or debated in 25 other states. It's important to distinguish the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide. They're similar, yet different. In the case of euthanasia, the doctor lethally injects the patient. In the case of assisted suicide, the doctor prescribes lethal medication that the patient would then take themselves. Washington, D.C. What happens here is critical to the debate on a national level. I came to the USA to see how it's unfolding for myself, to meet with advocates, critics, and lawmakers.
We're heading into a tipping point in the assisted suicide issue in the U.S.
Alex Schadenberg is the international chair of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. He says American assisted suicide advocates are disguising their message in something near and dear to the red, white, and blue.
They're selling assisted suicide as a form of freedom. And that's what seems to resonate with Americans. It's my choice. I can do what I want.
It's about the value of life. It's about caring, not killing.
Catherine Glenn Foster is a lawyer and a leading voice against assisted suicide in the USA.
There are cases in the court system right now that could very well end up before the court. And then in one fell swoop, the Supreme Court could turn the entirety of U.S. law on assisted suicide upside down. We've seen it in other countries, we've seen it in Canada, and it's coming. We know that it's coming, and it could unleash a tsunami of death on our country.
A recent study from Oregon revealed some surprising data about why Americans were asking to die.
That very few people are asking for euthanasia or assisted suicide because of actual pain. It's because of fear of future suffering. Now we know the assisted suicide lobby, they're telling us people are suffering and we're going to eliminate that suffering. But in fact, we can eliminate suffering without killing people. That's totally possible. The reality is this is about giving doctors the right in law to be involved with causing your death when you're at the lowest time in your life, when you actually need good supports, not lethal drugs.
In an Oregon study, participants were asked to rate their reason for requesting assisted suicide. Not one rated their current pain as greater than 2 out of 5. Still, many died by assisted suicide.
Of all places to come to the medical profession and say, we'd like for you to specifically douse that flame of life, that is an anathema to the medical profession. If you were just to replace the image of the needle or the pill with the gun, I think that would make a much more vivid picture of something that I think we can agree would be transculturally wrong.
Dr. Mark Comrade is a psychiatrist who co-authored and advocated for the passage of the American Psychiatric Association's historic position paper on euthanasia. The APA's ethics board unanimously agreed that their doctors should never prescribe or administer medications to cause death in any non-terminally ill patient.
And that if you wish to make that a right rather than a freedom for patients, we will stand in a position of protection of our vulnerable patients who are already vulnerable to begin with, even before these laws come into effect, and for whom, we sometimes are their only voice. So we will stand in a protective stewardship of their vulnerabilities by at least girding ourselves with an ethical proscription that forbids us to participate in helping our patients suicide. That's not what we do. We prevent suicide.
The APA could see from the European experience that the laws have gradually expanded over time.
And so that's why to establish a position is a fortification against the future.
Besides the American Psychiatric Association, the American Medical Association, the American College of Physicians, and the World Medical Association all reject doctor-assisted suicide.
Isn't this issue about people who are in insufferable pain, that are at the end of their life, that they want some relief, and in this case, they want to end their lives. Isn't that what this issue is about?
No, not at all. This is an issue that's about making the medical professional more comfortable with killing people.
Ann Hansen is a forensic psychiatrist with specialized training in the evaluation and treatment of people with serious mental illness.
What this is really about is changing the mindset of the medical profession. And I've heard testimony in legislatures where our politicians, the people sponsoring and supporting these bills, will say words to the effect of, well, doctors will have to be trained, to do this. Doctors will have to become comfortable with, doing assisted suicide.
Would you ever suggest suicide to any of your patients?
Well, that's my concern, is that physicians will come to approach this as a suggested treatment option. The potential for someone to persuade or to encourage or to guide someone in the particular choice certainly is there, and it could be done.
Bill Peace has felt the deadly pull of a doctor's powers of persuasion.
The most common reason people with paralysis die are from wounds, meaning a pressure sore. I've been paralyzed for 40 plus years now, and I have only had one wound, and that was in 2010. And it was a massive wound that was life-threatening. One day I looked and I had a red mark on the fatty part of the cheek. I knew I was in big trouble. My life hung in the balance. I had to have a debridement, which is a bloody procedure in which they take all the dead flesh, clean out the wound. There was a real question, would I survive? That's how bad the infection was. Physician in the middle of the night came to my room. He said, "Are you aware of how sick you are?" And I said, "Yes." And the physician went down a laundry list of things that could happen. That I would most likely go bankrupt because this wound would take up to 2 years to heal. I may never sit up again. That the odds of healthcare covering all the costs that I would be incurred were remote. That I may never work again, I may never sit again. But at the end of this cavalcade, at the middle of the night, he said, the decision to take life-saving antibiotics are yours and yours alone. I can make you comfortable if you decide to forego those life-saving antibiotics. He was very politely asking me if I wanted to die, and he would have made it happen.
Bill Peace doesn't think doctors should be in the business of talking patients into suicide.
If I were a 50-year-old dentist that came to the same hospital and needed 5 operations on my hip and limb lengthening because my femur is shattered, would not be offered that same opportunity. And I remember that next day, I called my siblings. I said help for the first time. And I had them write PhD on my chart. That was all because I was afraid.
While Bill's case does not constitute euthanasia per se, it does underscore the power physicians have under these laws and the real potential for abuse.
I'm a human being, period. It's really that basic, that just because I use a wheelchair does not mean that my life sucks. And that's the misperception every time you walk into a medical setting. Your life sucks, you're more work for staff, you're a problem. And that's every person that I have ever met with a disability has encountered that sort of bigotry. That when you go to a hospital setting, you're going to war. You're not afraid of medical treatment, you're afraid of the good-hearted physician that's going to independently decide you should die.
Critics worry if doctors in the USA are given the right to take a life, things will go exactly the same way they have in the Netherlands.
This is about state-sanctioned suicide. This is about giving the government the right to decide who is deserving of death and who isn't.
Nancy Elliott is a former elected representative from New Hampshire. She fought assisted suicide laws in her state and now dedicates her time to preventing the expansion of euthanasia laws.
It was at the same time this bill came that my husband was very critically ill. He had a heart disease, he had diabetes, he had Parkinson's, he had numerous kidney disease, numerous diseases. And one of the reps, they had put in this bill, this was an earlier bill, and they put in the reasons why you might want to do this. And they had loss of autonomy, loss of dignity, loss of bodily control. And so I asked him, what are you talking about? And so it was really pretty clear that this is what they were aimed at. They were aimed at people like my husband, who, in their opinion, shouldn't be living. He would have been so hurt. It would be like saying, you're a piece of junk, you need to get out of the way, you're taking up space, go kill yourself.
This is Portland, Oregon, the very first U.S. state to legalize assisted suicide back in 1997.
The law allows terminally ill patients to request and receive lethal medications to end their life under certain criteria.
Welcome to Death with Dignity.
I've never been welcomed to Death with Dignity before. When I visited Death with Dignity, the organization was recognizing 20 years of the law's passing in Oregon.
We're the organization that really works to get the law passed in other states. We work with lobbyists and legislators and governors to get laws passed, kind of the political process, the behind-the-scenes process.
And what is Death with Dignity?
Death with Dignity is a policy that's defined in law. And what it does is it takes a medical standard of care for what a physician or pharmacist should do if a patient requests a hastened death. What the Death with Dignity law does is it tells a patient and a physician, these are the steps that you have to qualify for a prescription to hasten death.
When I looked through your report from 2016, the Oregon Death with Dignity Act, Data Summary 2016, one of the underlying conditions was diabetes, and to me that kind of jumped out of the page of me. It said, some with diabetes access this law, and we have thousands and thousands of people who live with that condition and would die without their insulin.
So that's very rarely used. It's not one of the top, right?
But is it used?
It has been used, definitely. It has been used for diabetes.
Because that scares me.
People are choosing death over diabetes? There are scores of conditions treated and managed with modern medicine that would otherwise be fatal.
But the fact is that for those cases, you and I have not evaluated that patient, but we don't know what else was going on with the patient. We don't know if there were coexisting disorders.
So it's on the doctor then?
It's on the doctor, right.
That's a lot of responsibility to put on the doctor.
And we want that. We want, if a physician is going to prescribe, we want them to have a great deal of responsibility.
If conditions like diabetes are qualifying under the law, where are the stringent safeguards protecting the system from abuse?
The way the law is written is that two physicians have to evaluate the patient, and both physicians have to come to independent conclusion that the patient has the capacity to make healthcare decisions. If there's anything in the patient's record or anything that is part of the examination that either of the physicians feel like there is a question about whether or not this patient can make healthcare decisions, then the process stops and the patient has to be referred for counseling, for an evaluation, and for treatment before the law can go forward.
That's what the law says, but this Oregon doctor says that's not what's really happening.
I had another patient who was diagnosed with a malignant melanoma, metastatic cancer, form of cancer that's got a very poor prognosis. And he was quite depressed because he was an avid outdoorsman, loved to hike, loved to be outdoors, and he was diagnosed and he was seeing his oncologist, and he was quite depressed about it, and she even documented that in his note, and he went to his cancer doctor. And she called me and said, this patient really wants assisted suicide, and, I need to be the second opinion. And I said, well, no, let's wait a minute. Number one, what's going on? Let's talk about this. Well, what happened was that she must have found someone else, because 2 weeks later he was dead from an overdose of a medication. And so my colleague saw a patient with depression, but instead of addressing his depression, she gave him the means to kill himself.
You were the second opinion, were you not?
I was.
And so they went for a third until they got the answer they wanted?
That happens all the time here in Oregon.
Dr. Charles Benz says there's less oversight for taking a patient's life than there is for taking out their tonsils.
So it's the only procedure that I have at my disposal in the state where I'm protected completely from civil or criminal liability, and I don't even have to fill out any paperwork.
She said, Dr. Stevens, you don't understand. I'm here for the pills. I don't want to go through chemotherapy. I don't want to go through radiation. I want the pills. Give me the pills.
When I was arranging interviews with euthanasia advocates, I'd often be asked not to use the word suicide, as they said it was insensitive. In fact, the word suicide does not even appear on the death certificate of a doctor-assisted death. What we should be worried about is that suicides are contagious. When one person does it, others are likely to do the same.
We have an increasing number of deaths by assisted suicide every year.
And what about you in your practice?
The patient that I specifically recall is a patient by the name of Jeanette Hall, and she was referred to me by her surgeon. She had a low rectal cancer. So when I saw her, I told her what she had, and she said, I told her we could treat it with radiation and chemotherapy. And I said, well, this is potentially treatable. And she says, I don't understand. I don't want to go through all that. I had an aunt who lost her hair, and I don't want to lose my hair. And she went back and saw the surgeon. The surgeon told her that if she wasn't treated, that she would be dead within 6 months or a year. Now, the Oregon law says that if your life expectancy is 6 months, you qualify for the law. So I could have written her a prescription for the lethal medication at that time. But she came back, and I talked with her again, and she said, why aren't you giving me the pills? I want the pills. I learned more about her and learned that she had a son. He was going to the police academy. I said, well, wouldn't you like to see him graduate? And that really made her think that, hey, I do have something to live for. She really struggled in her mind as to whether she was going to be treated or not treated. She finally accepted the treatment. It took a few weeks to give. It was not easy. She actually did lose her hair, but the hair grew back. And she was able to attend her son's graduation from the police academy. 5 years later, my wife and I were at a restaurant, and she was there with a friend, and she came over and she said, Dr. Stevens, you saved my life. If I had gone to a doctor that believed in assisted suicide, I would not be here. I'd be dead.
Dr. Stevens decided to help his patient find something to live for. But does the language driving this movement seek to comfort or mislead?
It's the King's English.
The euphemisms driving this debate are the so-called choice in dying, options at the end of life, so-called death with dignity.
Dr. William Toffler is Professor Emeritus of the Department of Family Medicine at Oregon Health and Science University in Portland, Oregon.
So my wife that died 3.5 years ago of a metastatic leiomyosarcoma of the uterus. We were blessed with 5.5 years of life once the diagnosis of metastatic cancer had been made, which was about 4 times what had been predicted. And I treasure every moment that we had. Well, if taking a massive overdose of medication to kill yourself is dignified, then what does it say for the majority of people who die naturally, like my wife did 3.5 years ago, at home, peacefully, with family surrounding her? But she didn't take an overdose, so that's not dignified?
So what assisted suicide laws do is they manipulate people by redefining terms.
Alexandra Snyder is a lawyer fighting against the expansion of assisted dying laws.
You can phrase it aid in dying, you can call it assisted dying, you can call it whatever you want. The fact is, it encourages people who are vulnerable to kill themselves.
How important is language in this debate?
Language is a critical factor here. And as I think a famous person once said, all social engineering is preceded by verbal engineering. So if you can change the words, you can change how people think about it. But it's important to understand what assisted suicide is. Assisted suicide is the direct and intentional ordering of the death by a lethal overdose by a provider, physician. And it's self-ingestion of this lethal medicine, which is a suicide.
Well, a typical suicide, if you think about it, is a violent, irrational act. And what Death with Dignity does is it adds a dignity to the process, it adds the physicians to the process, but this is very different from a suicide in terms of this is a rational act by a person who's dying to control the timing and manner of their death.
Critics disagree. They say the only difference now is that a doctor is involved in the suicide of a patient and that language can be fatally deceptive.
Language is vitally important in this debate. Whether we're talking about assisted suicide or death with dignity, think about the difference between those two phrases. One of them sounds bad. And when you ask a polling question saying assisted suicide, you get one result. When you ask that question with the phrase death with dignity, of course everyone wants dignity. It's a positive phrase.
My job as a doctor is to alleviate their suffering. It's not to be a vending machine when they make a good, rational argument that they'd be better off dead. It's like being a lawyer for the defense and the lawyer for the prosecution in the same courtroom. Am I arguing for the health and well-being to extend life as long as is reasonable? Or am I advocating for their early demise because after all they're going to die anyhow? And then, by the way, if you don't think that's a conflict of interest, I'm also the judge to decide which argument's the best. And if you're not bothered by that, I'm also the executioner. There are about 200 doctors in the state of Oregon who believe they can keep all that conflict of interest straight. It's a delusion. If society is going to do this, if they believe that situational killing is the right answer for some illnesses, diseases, some points in life, then it should be someone outside of the house of medicine to avoid that inherent conflict of interest. Because after all, up until recently, there is no crystal ball reading course in medical school. And I say up until recently because for the first time in my university, in my department, some of my colleagues were teaching young doctors in training how they go about ending their patients' lives.
As bleak as it is, people have always been free to kill themselves. But when it becomes a right rather than a freedom, doctors could be compelled by law to cooperate whether they agree with it or not.
So a doctor who believes in doing no harm, a doctor who believes that they should never be involved with killing their patient, a doctor who believes in providing the best care possible, making sure the patients are well cared for, but never killing them, is now being put into a position where they're being told, well, if you get a request, you're going to have to send them to someone who's going to do this. Well, that's direct cooperation.
The final frontier for many doctors is their ability to make a personal choice of whether to assist in a suicide or not.
So people that absolutely don't want to participate find the idea of the medical system being involved in physician-assisted suicide so reprehensible that they can't even make a referral. The struggle as a doctor is a lot of us view it as we're servants of the patient. And then you have a law, and there's a tension there. And the question is how far along will a physician go? So will a physician go to the point of writing the prescription? Will the physician go to the point of referring to someone they know if the patient asks them? Will people say, I don't want to have any part of it? And right now, at least in Oregon and in America, people have absolute freedom. That's critical. That is absolutely critical.
I feel like that we cannot compel a physician who believes that religion is his or her religion is telling them not to prescribe. I don't know how we could compel them to prescribe. That seems so radically wrong.
But if it's a social movement, then isn't that gonna start to creep in, as it has in the Netherlands, as it has in Belgium, as it has in Canada?
I don't think so, because as a social movement, those ideas are fringe ideas. It's very hard for fringe ideas to make their way into mainstream in this country. In this political environment, it's not, in 20 years it hasn't happened. There's not been an inch move forward.
Peg Sandine says there's no forward movement in the U.S., but in Canada, advocates support forcing doctors to participate in euthanasia one way or the other. In Ontario, doctors who have a conscientious objection must refer their patient to a doctor who will do the deed. If they refuse, they could lose their license. It's called an effective referral. Critics say it's as bad as forcing the doctors to kill the patients themselves.
Where doctors are being asked to refer for assisted suicide against their wishes, against their consciences, and against the moral fabric of their entire profession.
It all adds up to a deadly diagnosis. The laws are fatally flawed. I've traveled 50,000 kilometers and talked to dozens of people on both sides of the issue. But the story doesn't end there. Remember Aurelia, the 29-year-old woman I met in Holland who wanted to be euthanized due to psychological illness? We maintained our correspondence even after I returned to Canada.
In December this year, of last year, I got news that my euthanasia request was approved. So
it was approved.
Yes. Today I got, I can tell you, I got from my pharmacist. I need to anti-vomit medication, and I got them today. I don't think you can see them very well, I think.
And what is it, did you say?
It's a medication so I don't vomit during the euthanasia.
Yeah.
And when I got them, I started crying.
Yeah.
So because that is also part of my, because I'm also mourning. Yeah. Because I don't choose to die, I choose to end suffering, and I choose because I know what, if I don't go on with the euthanasia, then I know what the other option will be.
I don't pretend to know what Aurelia is going through, but for me, I pleaded with her to change her mind, to continue to seek help, to use the same coping mechanism she's used to continue living, that there's always hope, that the world is a better place with her in it. This would be the last time I spoke with Aurelia. I'm left with the same questions I started with. What does it all mean? Where does it end? And have we gone too far? We've seen the law in the Netherlands expand bit by bit, from the terminally ill to the chronically ill to the mentally ill to those who are simply tired of life.
I do respect the choice people make under difficult circumstances, but we have failed to find the boundaries, and the boundaries are blurred to an extent that we are shifting all the time.
To those people who say it can never happen here, I would say this. I never thought it could happen here in Oregon. Who in their right mind would give their doctors the ability to kill their patients? Who would do that? Don't they see that there's just inherent harm in this strategy? That it could be taken to lengths that they can't imagine?
And the laws keep expanding. In Canada, for example, lawmakers and advocates have accelerated the expansion of these laws to catch up with 2 decades of advancement in the Netherlands and in Europe. They're even talking about euthanasia for children. I believe euthanasia advocates are motivated by a false compassion, but I know they mean the words they speak. They hope to end people's struggles with a pill or injection, quick results, on demand. But that's not life. Yes, we all fear the unknown struggles ahead, but we don't abandon people in their hour of need. We give them reason to hope. Our difficulties become the very reason for others to reach out and show what true compassion is.
Sheila Elson refused to abandon her daughter Candace when doctors told her to give up hope. Sheila brought Candace home against all odds and even medical advice.
She was pretty sick. But they weren't doing any more for her at the hospital than I would do at home. Nurses told me that. Well, she wanted to come home, and in my mind, she was dying. She wanted to come home. Home was where she was going. If she was going to pass away, I wanted her to go in where she wanted to be. She wanted to be home.
When Candace got home, something remarkable happened. The whole community rallied around the family to give Candace the care she needed, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, until she recovered. Candace loves her life, expressing joy and humor, art and music. And a year later, she escorted her twin sister down the aisle to give her away in marriage.
I know what we went through. I would not want another family to go through it.
After surviving her close call with euthanasia, Helen's mother lived another year, just enough time to meet her second great-granddaughter. Build Peace continues to fight for the rights of the disabled through his blog, badcripple.blogspot.com.
If I could do one thing, it would be just to undermine the myth of autonomy, that we have this right to die. No, we don't have a right to die. We have a right to live.
Today, I'm taking my dad for a checkup with his oncologist.
Hey, Daddy-O, how are you?
Pretty good, thanks.
Good. Ready for your checkup?
One day at a time, that's what I say, yeah.
It's been 3.5 years now since his diagnosis, and Dad is pretty much cancer-free. I have to admit, after the operation, there were times we weren't sure if he was going to make it. But Dad isn't one to give up hope. And that's what this is all about. Hope. He still thinks he's a burden, but he's wrong about that. There's no place I'd rather be right now than by his side.
If fear of suffering or becoming a burden are the reasons people lose hope, it's up to each of us to become the reason for somebody's tomorrow.
Hi again, this is Josie Lutke, Youth Coordinator for Campaign Life Coalition. I hope you all enjoyed that film. I know the topic is depressing. It's depressing to think about what our future could be if we don't take action now. And that's why it is important to inform yourself more on this issue. You can do so by visiting fatalflawsfilm.com, or you can visit Euthanasia Prevention Coalition's website, www.epcc.ca, or you can visit Alex Schadenberg's blog, www.epcblog.org. There are some action items on Bill C7 on Campaign Life Coalition's website, www.campaignlifecoalition.com, so we would definitely urge you to contact your MP about that bill. And then again, just to remind you all, we have a couple of events tomorrow night as well. Father Alphonse de Valk passed away recently. We are having a mass for him at 6 p.m. Eastern. He was the author of Morality and Law in Canadian Politics, the Abortion Controversy, and he was a former editor of the Interim newspaper. So if you could join us for that mass, we'd really appreciate it. And then at 8 p.m. Eastern, we're having our online candlelight vigil for victims of abortion. That will be hosted by a guy and a girl, aka Kathleen and Jesse LeBlanc. It will feature moving personal testimonies and prayers and religious reflections, so you definitely don't want to miss out on it. And then, of course, all of these events can be found at marchforlife.ca. And if you want to send us pictures of you participating in the virtual National March for Life program, we'd love that. You can always tweet at us at Campaign Life. Anyway, I hope that you have a good night, and I hope to see you tomorrow.